Welcome to Wellsprings of Faith. My name is Father Liias. I'm a Roman Catholic priest, and I serve as a senior priest on the staff of St. Patrick's Church in Stoneham. We record this program here in Melrose, where I live. Our program looks at religious faith and the journey of faith in a person's life and the fruit of that faith in their life and in our world. Today I welcome to our program Karen. She is from New Hampshire, and I had the occasion to meet her at a wonderful parish I occasionally say Mass at in St. Marie's Parish in West Manchester, New Hampshire. And she is involved in a ministry in the Catholic Church called Catholic in Recovery, and we'll be exploring that as well. Welcome, Karen.
Thank you, Father.
Thank you for coming down from the cold north to the cold south here. It's a British. What's today? December the 14th, and it's very cold out there.
It is.
But before we get to your work as in your ministry in Catholic in Recovery, I always like to hear about a person's journey in faith from as far back as you want to go and can remember to today. So talk a little bit about your own journey as a Christian.
Well, I was raised in Ohio, and in a Catholic home, and I'm one of 8 children.
Oh, that's a good Catholic home.
I'm number 5. I'm number 5, and went to Catholic school through 8th grade, and after that went on to public high school and college. Graduated with a degree in biology and chemistry as well.
Were you a pretty active Catholic family, or kind of more as a lot of kind of nominal or occasional, or?
My father sang in the choir.
Okay.
My mother was busy at home with all of us children. For the longest time, we had just one car, so it wasn't as though there was a lot of movement
have to
going
do
on.
a shuttle system to get you to church, huh?
And it was kind of a rural type area.
Yeah.
It was a former fruit farm that my parents had bought. So I would say that no, although we made, my parents made sure that we prayed at home. I remember as a young girl, a little girl, praying the rosary at night.
So there were some aspects of Catholic spiritual life at home as well.
Yes.
Good. So when did your faith come more to fruition?
Well, I think
or personal.
Probably not until I was in my late 20s.
Okay.
And I had been searching. I'd been searching for quite some time, and really could not find a church that I found welcoming. I found a lot of older and coldness in the church, and
were you looking
kept
mostly
me
Catholic
away.
churches, or did
Catholic.
you branch out to Protestant too?
Because
a lot of Catholics find the Lord in a Protestant church and then come back.
Yeah.
I've discovered.
Yes, that's true. Actually, I did go to a couple of Protestant churches with my ex-husband.
Yeah.
And those were nice and warm, but they lacked something.
Yeah.
They really lacked something. So it wasn't probably until I was, I think I was 32, and I was pregnant with my twin sons. And it was a difficult pregnancy, and I was in a marriage that it was very difficult. And I just thought, gosh, how am I going to do this? How am I going to handle this? And I started to try to go back to church when I was pregnant. And I did find a church down the street from me, Immaculate Conception in Nashua, New Hampshire. And I felt very welcome there.
At this point, you were living in New Hampshire, yeah.
I was in New Hampshire, yes, at that point. And so I started to go to Mass there on Sundays. And then the boys were born, and that consumed my time.
Yeah.
And because I was very isolated, and as a result of that, not having someone to talk to or whatever, I do remember calling my father and saying, what do you do when you're when you just when Mom drives you crazy, what do you do? Because my husband's driving me crazy. And he told me something that really surprised me, because my dad was always a pretty matter-of-fact kind of guy. It's like, this is what you do next. Yeah. And he said, I can't tell you what to do, Karen. And I thought, wow, that's funny. And why all of a sudden you can't tell me what to do? Okay. He said, but I can tell you what I do. Excuse me. He said, I go to my bedside and I kneel down like I was a little boy, and I tell Jesus everything in my heart.
Oh, wow.
Well, I had been away from the Catholic Church for about 10 years, and I just thought, well, what a stupid thing to do. That's what I thought.
Yeah. Wow.
And I thought, I'm not going to do that. But later that night, I was like, I've tried everything else. I've tried to manipulate. I've tried this, I've tried that. It doesn't work. I'll do what my dad suggested. Huh. So I knelt down and I prayed, and I could not believe how angry I was. I was really angry with God. And after I was done saying what I needed to say to God, I felt such a release off my shoulders. It was wonderful. And I actually went to sleep that night and woke up the next day. I had slept through the night, and it had been maybe 2 years that I hadn't been able to sleep through the night.
It's interesting and wonderfully instructive. I thank you for sharing that. Because I know as a priest, I often try to encourage people to be honest with God. I think people think prayer is some kind of pious thing. It might be saying, there are nice prayers that we know, especially as Catholics, the rosary, But if you read the Bible, like the Psalms, the emotional honesty that the psalmists have when they're praying. Now remember, the Psalms are the prayer book of the Bible. If you want instruction how to pray, read the Psalms. And they're so emotionally honest. They get mad at God. Where are you, God? Why have you abandoned me? Even Jesus from the cross, my Lord, why have you forsaken me? I mean, the emotional honesty, but that's the beginning of a real relationship with God. Especially if you've been away from Him for a while, it's not, it's just this reality of who you are, being open and honest and vulnerable with God. So thank you. And you discovered that.
Yes, I did.
No one instructed you in prayer. You just did it.
I did it. I had the conversation. And as a result, I found that I woke up one morning and I was like, what is that sound? And I realized I was humming. Oh. And then I started to sing. And it was like, wow, it's been such a long time since I've sung, So, and I had this conviction. I need to get my sons up, dressed, and ready, and fed, and to Mass by 9 o'clock.
Wow.
But Father, there was no way I could do that. Absolutely no way. It wasn't possible for me to do that. But this conviction was so strong that I went ahead and I did it anyway. Wow. And as I'm preparing the boys, one of them I'm not sure why, he was on the floor, and the other was on the changing table. And the one on the floor started to cry. Now, that would have been enough stress for me to have just, ended my whole day. Okay, the rest of the day is shot. But I just had this notion to kick off my slipper, hand the child my toes, and wiggle my toes so he could play with my toes
while you were changing
his brother, And
that's why God gave us 2 arms and 2 legs.
See, there you go. Anyway, so I ended up getting them into the car, getting them to church, getting them inside, carrying them like this. And they were heavy. They were like 25 pounds each. They were heavy boys. And I was there before Mass started.
Wow.
It is my conviction that God chose to stop the world from turning so that I could get there in time.
Wow.
I mean, I'll take a lie detector test,
Well, there are some stories in the Bible where that happened. So, the sun stopped.
Yes.
And Joshua, there was something he had to do, and the sun stopped, according to the Bible.
And the rest of the story goes like this. I'm in church now. Mass starts. One of the boys wakes up, so I take him out of his car carrier.
Yeah.
And I've got him. Now the other one wakes up. Ooh, what do you do? How do I do that? And wouldn't you know it, just this lovely, lovely woman comes up beside me, doesn't say a word, just picks up my child, comforts him, and
Oh, wow.
you know, just a beautiful, beautiful friendship came of that. And there were two older women there, about 10 years older than I, that was one of them, who really took me under their wings and helped bring me back into the faith and taught me those things
How
that I'd
wonderful.
forgotten or didn't know.
All
So,
from that screaming assault at the God
yes,
on the beginning of a whole new return to the Lord.
Yes.
How wonderful.
yes.
It's a great story.
And it's been my experience that when I take a step forward toward him, it can be the teeny tiniest step, but he's so abundant in his grace and mercy.
Yeah.
It's like 1,000-fold I get back from him. It's
Yeah,
just-
that's the thing about God. He just needs a little crack in us saying, come in, and he will come in.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
people think I got to be perfect, I got to be all gathered together, I got to be sinless. That's no. He'll work you in that direction, but it's not. It's not you get there first and then God will show up. So that's wonderful. So that's a real beginning, kind of rebirth, huh?
Yes,
You
exactly.
could talk about being born again, quite literally,
Exactly.
spiritually.
And I think from there, I found my faith. Instead of my father's faith or my mother's faith, I found my faith and built on that. And from there, the Lord took me through Cursillo, which was just like a love fest.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, for those who don't know, Cursillo is a wonderful renewal movement in the Catholic Church. Cursillo means a little short course, but it's essentially a retreat where you really deepen your relationship with the Lord.
And then through Life in the Spirit seminar, which teaches you how the gifts of the Holy Spirit, and there's prayer that's prayed over you so that you can receive those gifts. And there's a lot of education about how the Holy Spirit works. And from there, I've gone through many other small retreats. The first real retreat I did was a silent retreat. I had no idea it was a silent retreat. It was in Jaffrey, New Hampshire, in this beautiful old mansion home that had been given to the church, and it's now gone. But all I could think of was, I just want to come up here, and I want to bring my guitar, and I want to go out onto the mountain and just look out and play my guitar. I get there, I find out
It's like Marie from The Sound of Music.
Yes. I get there and I find out that it's overcast and raining. And it's a silent retreat. But the interesting thing was, by the end of the retreat, it was beautiful to be just silent. And when I went back home, that's when our parish started 24-hour adoration. And that first hour in adoration, I was like, oh, I know how to do this.
Yeah. Yeah, that's wonderful. Now, which parish was that?
That was Immaculate Conception.
Okay, in Nashua.
In
you
Nashua.
mentioned that
Yep.
parish.
Yep.
Yeah.
In Nashua.
So had the charismatic renewal affected that parish?
Oh, yes,
Yeah,
very
it
much
sounds like
so.
it did.
Very
Yeah,
much so.
yeah.
And there were prayer groups, several prayer groups. I know I remember attending the one in Revere College.
I've actually spoken to that group. Yeah, no. Right.
And there was one in Milford at St. Patrick's. That was interesting. It was all couples. And at the time, I was actually, unfortunately, going through a divorce. And here the Lord's got me with a bunch of couples.
You got
and
a
I was
bigger
like,
family, you know.
But I think he was trying to teach me things about, it can be done, Karen.
Yeah,
It is a possibility. It is, yeah.
So that's wonderful. So that how long ago was that? This was in your mid-30s, you said?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that was your return to the Lord. And then how did you, let's talk a little bit about your ministry now, which is, tell me again the name. It's Catholic.
Catholic in
Talk about
Recovery.
what is that ministry now that the Lord's led you into? I assume your boys have grown up, right?
Oh yes,
Yeah.
they've grown up and
So
they've
now
flown the
you
coop and
have
they've
time for other things.
Yes, I do. I
'Cause
do.
that quite literally must have been a handful raising 2 boys by yourself.
Yes, I was by myself.
Yeah.
They were lovely, and God was so wonderful. I dedicated my boys one day at Mass. I just realized I can't do this, Lord, alone. You're going to have to take them, and I gave them back to the Lord. And ever since that moment, excuse me, I would find myself in a jam, and He would give me. The Holy Spirit would just like whisper me these hints and stuff, like. You know, we were dealing with money. It was maybe their first opportunity to deal with money, and I said, okay, I need to give them something here so that they can understand it's not all about spending it on themselves.
Yeah.
And the Lord gave me this. He said, spend, save, share. The 3 S's. You know, simple for a child to, you know,
right.
and so he'd give me little gems like that it's like out of nowhere.
That's great. That's great. Wow. So back to more recently,
Yes.
or I don't know, recently, I'm not sure when you started this whole work, being involved with this work. Tell us a little bit about what it is and, again, what's involved and what you're
Well,
doing.
I started out in a 12-step work a couple of decades ago in Overeaters Anonymous because my weight was becoming unmanageable and food was becoming a compulsion and a really unhealthy attachment. And I started in OA, and I found some recovery there, but I felt kind of like, you know, who is this higher power they're talking about? I know who my higher power is. My higher power is Jesus. He's the great physician. I know him. And then, so I moved from that to Celebrate Recovery, which is the Christian rendition.
Right. For those who might be unfamiliar just out there, you know, these are all variations of, most people have heard of AA, and that's really the kind of first and most well-known of what are called 12-step programs. But obviously, AA deals with the problem of alcohol, and it's gone on. There are NA for people struggling with narcotic addictions, and there's Gamblers Anonymous, and Sex Anonymous, and
Hoarders
and
Anonymous.
Overeaters Anonymous, and Hoarders Anonymous. And in a way, of course, it's these steps, which the 12 steps it's called, are principles of living to get free from whatever the addiction is. And they're really Catholic principles. I mean, they're Christian principles. But sometimes they've gotten, as we were talking about this before the show, a little more secular. But the original 12 steps was a Christian program of recovery.
Yes.
So what did you discover in the, what's the program you did connect with Christians in?
Celebrate Recovery.
Celebrate Recovery.
Celebrate
And what
Recovery.
was that?
And they would always start out with an hour or so of just praise and worship music.
So it was a more explicitly Christian
and, yes,
12-step group.
yes, and then a
essentially.
teaching, and then they would break up into small groups.
Yeah.
And I just found that that I was more free to talk about Jesus. But if I talked about, well, I went to confession, and boy, what a relief it was to just release, to be able to go to confession. Or I was in adoration, and I felt like the Lord spoke to me and said this. And I would say that, I didn't have a problem saying that in my small groups.
Yeah.
But it was like nobody ever acknowledged that. It was, nobody ever came up to me afterwards and said, well, what do you mean by that?
Yeah.
Or, you know, and it was just like, it kind of fell flat.
Was it? Do you think that was just a kind of ignorance, or also just a kind of anti-Catholic prejudice?
Well,
Because these were Protestant groups
yes,
primarily,
yes.
correct, even though you were a Catholic.
yes, and I would say that there were many times, because in these groups you introduce yourself.
Yeah.
And so people may introduce themselves as, hi, my name is Susan, and I'm a recovering Catholic.
Oh, yes.
And And I can understand that.
Yeah.
I can understand that. Why people need to recover, because there can be issues with how someone is taught the catechism
That's right.
and how it's presented to them and all. But at the same time, it's like the Lord was leading me, because I kept asking him, what's the basis of my problem here? What's the real
Yeah.
root of my problem? I don't want to treat the symptoms. I want to treat the root.
Yeah.
And he said, he basically said to me, Karen, you're my daughter. You're my beloved daughter. And until you see yourself in that image that I see you in, you're going to struggle.
Yeah.
So I started introducing myself in a meeting and saying, I'm a beloved daughter of God. And I found that whether I believed it or not didn't make a difference.
No, that's who you are, right.
Yes, this is my true identity. And not only that, but I am Catholic.
Yeah.
I am Catholic through and through.
Yeah.
You can't separate that out.
You remind me of, of course, the words of God to Jesus, God the Father to Jesus at his baptism. You are my beloved Son. In you I am well pleased. And I've always said, that, for particularly those of us who come from a sacramental tradition, and baptism is very important. What happens in baptism is we become sons and daughters of God through the sacrament of baptism through Christ. And God says to us, you are my beloved Son. And part of growing in faith is to discover your baptismal identity. That's who you really are. Not what the world says, not even what you think about yourself and what your parents think about you, and all the ways we absorb rejection and self-shame and self-hatred. No, I'm a child of God. I'm a son of God. I'm a daughter. God says to me, you are my daughter. And he said that to you, and you heard that.
Yes.
And that is the beginning of deep, deep healing and recovery.
And what I found was that because I couldn't talk about the Catholic kinds of things, I wanted you to have this.
Oh, okay.
And that's the book that was written by
Founder, Director of
Scott
Catholic.
Weeman,
Yeah.
who is the founder. And
Wonderful.
Scott led a life very much like St. Augustine, and has done a 180, and what an amazing man he is. And since the pandemic, this group started about 5 years ago, and I knew about it, but there weren't any groups in my area, so I couldn't go to any of those groups. But with the pandemic, everything went virtual.
Oh, that's right. So
and it exploded. It just exploded because people needed God.
Yeah.
They were being isolated from community and from church and all of that, and from the sacraments. So,
it's interesting that there were. I discovered the same thing during the pandemic. Some, like for example, I'm a speaker at a men's Bible study group, which goes on in Boston it's an ecumenical Bible study group. When during the pandemic we had to go virtual. Well, suddenly we had people. Literally, I had people from Costa Rica, Guatemala, Southern California, tuning in to the Bible study.
Exactly. If they understood English, they probably could.
Bible study was 7:30 in the morning. For the person from California, was getting up at 4:30 in the morning out in the West Coast.
Yep.
And similarly, I'm involved in the ministry to people who've lost children. We would do retreats and day-long seminars and things like that. But during the pandemic, we had to go virtual. We'd have people from all over the country and outside the country even who somehow connected with us. And we'd have these, these gatherings ministering to people who've lost children. So God really opened a lot of opportunities, and as it clearly did with you, too. Yeah.
And as a result, Catholic in Recovery is not just... It's based in San Diego.
Yes, I see that.
And so it was kind of just around that area. But now it's all throughout the U.S. as well as Canada. So now in Canada, it's in Mexico, and I think we're in a South American country
Wow.
also. So,
I think, it's interesting because I think, I was an Episcopal priest for 40 years, and then I'm a recovering Episcopalian, you might say. I became a Catholic. But what's interesting is, even as a young Episcopal priest, I discovered the power of the various 12 Steps programs, but I also discovered it was an Episcopal priest who developed the 12 Steps, a man named Sam Shoemaker, who with Bill W. founded AA in New York. And the 12 Steps was originally a Christian program called the Moral Rearmament, where people would get in small groups. And the thing is, the 12 Steps are not just for people who have addictions. We're all addicted to sin. The problem of sin may break out in different ways. In one person, it might be alcoholism. Another person might be sexual obsessions. Another person might be gambling. Might be all kinds of stuff. In every one of us, we have an addiction to sin. That's part of and so the 12 Steps applies to human beings, all human beings, no matter what their issue, and you apply these 12 Steps to come into recovery and healing and deliverance and freedom, all the things that you discover. And so you started a group in
New Hampshire.
New Hampshire.
Yep, started a group in New Hampshire. And right now the group that I'm leading is disordered eating. So it's for people who have an unhealthy attachment to food, that obsess about food, that either don't eat enough or they're so concerned about how they look, they don't eat enough or they eat too much. And we started that a few months ago. Prior to that, we started just a general recovery group, which is what that book
But that's right, because
talks
it said
about.
we all come in and we all have some issue.
Exactly. So we have the workbook that goes with it.
Wow.
So that was just released within a few months.
Yeah.
And for our meetings, we have there's different ways that our meetings can be run depending on the leader of the meeting.
Yes.
And so one of the things that Scott does is he does a weekly writing, and it's based on the scripture for the coming Sunday, and recovery principles.
So he really integrates it right into the normal Catholic life.
Yes, and it's wonderful.
So
it's wonderful.
It's funny that you should name the thing Catholic in Recovery. He must have been teasing, because there are so many people who say, I'm a recovering Catholic. And now, and of course they mean it in a negative way.
Yes.
Catholicism, messed me up and now I'm recovering from it. But this is like a positive. This is, Catholicism is in the sense of this Christian program with a Catholic dimension to it, is the road to recovery, not the road not the road to disorder, which is what the other people mean. That's wonderful, wonderful.
And I did want to mention too that there is a group that started in Massachusetts, in Ipswich, Massachusetts.
Okay. Oh, great.
And I believe that's a general recovery meeting.
Good. Is there a website for Catholic?
There's definitely a website.
Well, maybe what we'll do is post the website connection on the credits for our program today, so people can get a hold of it. And as I've said, and you say, it's not. You don't have to be a drug addict.
No, you do not.
Living on the streets to avail yourself of this. We're all in recovery.
Yes,
we're all recovering from sin, and the wages of sin, which are ultimately death. We're all recovering through Christ, the power of Christ, and the wonderful gifts and graces of the church. Confession. Every once in a while, I'll get someone doing it. Their 12-step in whatever it is, and they'll say, Father, can I do, what is it, the 5th step is to make a fearless moral inventory. So the 12
That's number
steps,
4, and then the fifth one is to share it.
Unfortunately, we're out of time, Karen, and we could. I would love to go more deeply into the steps, because they really are the principles of living, the living out of the Christian faith in practical, daily ways that we live. It is the Christian religion is a way. The earliest name for Christianity was the way. That's right. It was not just a thing you believed, it was a way you lived. And this is one of the best ways to live into that pattern. So thank you.
Oh, it's been a pleasure being here.
And blessings on your group, newest group, and and the spread of this movement into
Thank
our
you, Father.
culture. I hope you've enjoyed this journey. Again, we will post the website for Catholic in Recovery. As I said, there are also a Protestant version if you're a Protestant to go, but at the heart of it is the Christian faith, Jesus Christ, who gives us, liberates us to come to know who we really are as children of God and to be free from all the foils and foibles of the devil, as we say, and to come into the glorious freedom that God wants us to have as his children. So God bless you, and thank you, Karen.